It gives me a pleasure to introduce Rabbi Dayle Friedman this evening. Rabbi Dayle has been, in her words, mining the Torah of aging from elders themselves and from Jewish teaching and sharing that wisdom for the past 30 years. Rabbi Dayle is a spiritual care professional, a rabbi, a teacher, a social innovator, and a writer located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Today, Rabbi Dayle will be sharing insights into how to prepare for the prospect of living with dementia, with compassion, creativity, and spaciousness. The hour-long webinar will be followed by an optional green room conversation with Rabbi Dayle. If you have signed up for that, please stay online at the conclusion of the presentation. And for more information about Rabbi Dayle and her work, she would like you to go to her website, growingolder.net. And now, let's hear from Rabbi Dayle.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm hoping that this is working. I'm not seeing myself.
You are fine, Dale. Go right ahead.
Fine. Okay, great. So I am so honored and thrilled to be with everybody this evening or today or whatever time it is where you are, and to go on a bit of an adventure together. The late Maggie Kuhn, who founded the Grey Panthers, said that when she turned 80 years old, she decided that she needed to do one outrageous thing a day for the rest of her life. Well, I am not yet 80. I'm 62, and I don't necessarily do something outrageous every day, but what I'm going to do with you is slightly outrageous, because I'm inviting you to contemplate the prospect of living with dementia. Now, I always joke about the things that I'm interested in and say that the things I like to explore and talk about and think about are things that send most normal people running, screaming from the room. But you're here and you haven't run screaming yet. So I'm very glad that you're with me for this adventure. And I hope that it will provoke you and maybe even offer you some new vantage point. And I also see myself as a learner in this exploration. So what I want you to do now, if you will, is take a few minutes or a few moments and respond to the prompts that are on the slide. When I get dementia, let that just sink in. When I get dementia, I fear, and then you have, some of you might have printed out the handout, but even if you don't, if you jot down just a couple of notes to yourself, what is it that comes to mind? What do you fear about getting dementia? And now, when I get dementia, I hope, and just jot down or think about one or two or three things that you hope for when you get dementia. What I'd like you to do is share on the chat something about what you fear when you get dementia. And I believe Gail will harvest some of the things that people are writing and share them out loud. They're scrolling by, but I think it might be more helpful to just hear them.
Yeah, I fear loneliness, frustration, and bitterness. People will not value who I am. I fear the unknown. I fear bringing pain to my family, how I will be treated, not remembering, not making sense, losing myself, forgetting my family, loss of independence, running out of money, loss of connection, being a burden to my family, losing zest life, being a burden, loss of quality, not able to make sense, not being well cared for or taken advantage of. No one will want to take me. Caregiver abuse. Not able to do things.
Okay. That's so rich. So many things come up and so many common themes. And I just want to read one that's just coming up. I will be mean and ugly to people. Yes. Will I even recognize myself? So lots to be afraid of. But let's see what hopes there might be. Please do the same, just as you did with the chat, and jot down something that you hope for when you have dementia.
The first one, I hope I don't know it.
Hmm.
I hope there will be love around me. People will have a sense of humor with me, will laugh, smile, also be able to have some joy, will value who I am. It's going fast. Will remain nice and loving, be happy, not live too long. Kind, understanding people around me, treated with compassion. Find joy in life, surrounded by those who love me. Still have a sense of humor. Be well cared for, loved, loving, and singing. Surrounded by something in humor. Be a peaceful person. Have good friends and be a good friend. Be courageous. Still being in God's presence.
Have a dog.
Have a dog. Yeah.
Oh,
Be in community. Meaningful life.
Beautiful. So perhaps it's radical to even think about hopes. Let's switch to the next slide. I wanted to jot down a few fears that Ann Basting, who is a fantastic resource and creative force in the field of dementia, in her book Forget Memory, she mentions a few key fears, and I think every single one of them actually was mentioned among us, including and some more. Now, why am I asking us to take this imaginative leap? Why am I asking us to even say this phrase, when I get dementia, which can make you shudder a little bit? I am doing this because this is very, very possibly, even likely, our future. We've learned, according to Peter Whitehouse and Daniel George, that as one grows older, dementia becomes more common to the point that we might all be affected if we live long enough. If we live long enough, we are very likely going to face dementia. And it is very unlikely, no matter how young some of us might be, that there's going to be, by that time, a single magic bullet cure that will eradicate dementia, despite the commercials of the Alzheimer's Association, which say the last patient is out there, but we don't know who it is yet. God willing, someday there might be a cure to dementia, but it's not simple, and it's not something that we can just wish away. Let's change the slide, please. One of the reasons that this conversation is so difficult is because the way that dementia is depicted in the media, in literature and culture, and in our society writ large is a tragedy. That's not to say that it's not difficult, but the tragedy narrative comes from fear, and it prompts fear. The tragedy narrative depersonalizes people with dementia, who are seen in this narrative as empty vessels with no agency, no story. So much of the discussion of dementia simply omits the vantage point of the person with dementia. So what we're left with is this terrible thing that has happened to a family, or this costly thing that is happening to our society. And really, we know so little about how does dementia look from the inside? What are the complexities of it? Because we lived with this immensely dark narrative about dementia, the result is fear and loathing. Let's switch the slide. We know that in surveys of Americans, the thing that people over 55 fear most is not cancer, but Alzheimer's disease. And by the way, I use the term dementia because dementia is a more broad and generic term. It's a set of conditions of which Alzheimer's disease is one particular type. But in the survey, Americans were asked, what do you fear most? And the answer was Alzheimer's disease. When I told people that I was going to do this webinar about spiritually preparing for dementia, they said, oh, you mean for somebody else, right? Because the idea that we would actually incorporate in our vision of our own future this reality that we very well might get dementia is unthinkable. Now, I want to suggest that dreading and denying and avoiding are costly. Why? Well, if you haven't prepared for dementia, how does anybody know what you would want? If you haven't thought about it, what ends up happening is that somebody in your life gets a call in the middle of the night because you left the stove on, or you were found wandering, or in some other way, your life structure no longer fits the reality of your capacities, and nobody knows what you would want or what to do. People who care about you are left in a situation where there's a lot of burden on them, because not only do they need to figure out what needs to happen, but they have to figure out based on an absence of knowledge of your wishes and values and desires and priorities. I also think that not preparing is very hard for us. It places a lot of burden on us, because then we're surprised and we haven't had an opportunity to contemplate for ourselves how we might structure our lives, how we might surround ourselves in a way that would be helpful. Basically, I want to suggest a theorem that resistance and avoidance and denial add suffering. I think that's probably generally true. It certainly has been true in my experience and in the individuals and families whom I've accompanied through this journey. So we want to think of another way. Let's change the slide, please. Part of the way we can do another way is to open to the complexity of dementia, to realize that dementia can be sad, it can be incredibly difficult, but it's not just unremitting tragedy. It's far more complex. And I've learned this from accompanying hundreds, maybe thousands of people with dementia on their journeys. So I want to share a little bit about what I've learned and then talk about how we might prepare. Let's turn to the next slide, please. One way that I think about living with dementia is that it's like what the children of Israel did once we were freed from slavery. We wandered in the wilderness. And the thing about wandering in the wilderness is that it's a journey without guideposts. We don't know exactly where it began or where it's going to end. It's a journey that can be confusing. The path is not always clear. And it's a journey that can be at times lonely and harsh. Next slide, please. In the experience of dementia, time is altered. We can't, just like the children of Israel couldn't go back to Egypt, where they'd left, they didn't have access to that past anymore, and they complained about it ceaselessly. If you read in the Torah the narratives of the wilderness years, they complained, oh, it was so wonderful back there in Egypt. There were watermelons and cucumbers. And the interesting thing about that is, and we were enslaved, but we can sometimes wish for the past. Now, the thing about when you have dementia is that you don't have access to your past, perhaps because no one's around who shared it, perhaps because you can't remember it. And you don't have access to the future. You don't know what the future will bring. It's a mystery. And one thing that you do know about the future is that this journey leads to death. And often the people close to us, or the people caring for us, or the environments in which we might find ourselves, if we are in an elder care situation, tend to not acknowledge that future. You know, death is the neighbor next door when you're in an elder care community or in any kind of senior community, but often sort of denied, ignored, quickly washed over. So when the past is not accessible and the future is not accessible, what you have is the present moment, which can be wonderful if the present moment has pleasure in it, and which can be terrible if the present moment has discomfort or anxiety or loneliness or pain. Next slide, please. The thing about being in the wilderness is that you're vulnerable to sometimes a hostile environment. Sometimes you're vulnerable to others who do not have your best interests at heart. Some of the fears that some of us shared have to do with this. Tom Kitwood, the great theorist about dementia, talked about different manners of dehumanization that sometimes people with dementia encounter. And these are the hostile forces in the wilderness of dementia. And these are just a few of them that I've included on this slide. Deception. People don't tell you the truth. I remember vividly, and will never forget, a family who wouldn't allow the nursing home in which I worked to tell a woman that her husband had died. The horror of asking for the carers, asking them to lie in every interaction with this woman when she said, "Where's my husband?" But also for her to be so alone with knowing in some gut way, as I think she did, that something had happened, and having no one to share it with because no one would acknowledge it with her. That deception is such a deep dehumanization. Disempowerment. How often do people with dementia have choices taken away from them for no particular reason except maybe the convenience of people who are caring for them? We forget that a person can have a will and preferences and desires, and taking those away is a terrible thing. Infantilization, we all know about that. It can be so simple as calling someone sweetie, who in their entire 88 years was never anybody's sweetie. It can be just in the tone that's used with someone. That is a harsh reality to contend with. And finally, objectification. An anthropologist named Renee Rose Shields studied a nursing home, and she talked about the workers talking about their care tasks as bed and body work. In other words, focusing on the bodily function or the task that's involved instead of the person, the story, the longings. These are harsh, harsh, harsh realities of that wilderness, but they are not the only ones. Next slide, please. In the midst of a desert, a wilderness, you can find oases. And I have certainly seen oases of connection that are possible, whether someone is oriented to person, place, or thing, or can count backwards from 100 by 7, or name the President of the United States. It's possible to have deep and beautiful connection. Next slide, please. This is one example. This is the father of a friend of mine who was very confused and not particularly verbal, but she and he spent an amazing afternoon looking at these beautiful birds in a birdcage in the nursing home where he was. And what she said was, we didn't need words. We didn't need orientation. Being together, looking at this beautiful piece of nature was all we needed. And sometimes those connections are miraculously sweeter and deeper than ones that might have been had when a person was fully functioning and oriented. You never know what kinds of oases of connection can be found between the person with dementia and others, between the person with dementia and nature, music, loveliness, delight. Next slide, please. What I've been thinking about of late is, how can we prepare spiritually for dementia? I found very little literature or theology or resources that deal with this head on. The only people I've found who actually are talking about it are Buddhists. And I did find some interesting reflections by Buddhist teachers on this topic. But I searched within my Jewish tradition, and I hope you'll find it of use as well. And what I remembered was that there's a teaching by the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of Hasidic Judaism. He was a great spiritual innovator in his time, who stood for the idea that religion should speak to everybody, not just learned people, but everybody, who suggested that access to spirituality should be through experience and through joy and through music. So one of the Baal Shem Tov's teachings was about how do we deal with unwelcome experiences. And what I want to do with you is to look at the 3-step approach that the Baal Shem Tov offered for unwelcome experiences and see how we might be able to apply it to the unwelcome experience of living with dementia. So the 3 steps that he suggests are: first, yielding or softening. Second, the second step is discernment, or I'd say curiosity. Excuse me. And the third step is sweetening, or I would suggest the possibility of transformation. Let's go to the next slide. So the first step is yielding, hachna'ah, which I would call softening to reality. Next slide, please. What do we have to do in order to soften to reality? We have to surrender expectations. We have to say, I don't know what this is going to be like, or maybe this is not what I ordered, but this is what is there. In Hebrew, there's an expression, ze ma sheyesh. This is what we've got. That's yielding. That's hachna'ah, to say, okay, this is not maybe what I desire, but this is what's here. Let me be with reality. Elizabeth Lesser, a spiritual teacher, says, my prayer to God every day is this: remove the veil so I might see what is really happening here. See what is really happening here and not be intoxicated by my stories and my fears. There's a thing we do when we're resisting, which is we harden. I think about what happens if you have a backache. And if you have a backache, what can happen is you feel sore and then your muscles stiffen, and then you feel sore and you move less and your muscles stiffen even more. And you want to just take to your bed and not move at all, and then you stiffen more. And actually today, what a doctor would say is, actually you have to keep moving with the pain. You have to keep in it. You can't shut down because that makes it worse. So not being stopped by our fears, but being able to say, this is what is hachna'ah, that first step. This is what is. I have dementia. I'm forgetting things. I'm not going to tell myself stories about it. Now, I need to say one thing about that, which is to make a distinction, because there is such a thing as what neurologists and psychiatrists call benign forgetfulness. We all forget things. We all forget our keys. We all forget to lock or unlock the door occasionally. There are things that happen to anybody. And more so as we grow older. Somebody said that instead of singing head, shoulders, knees, and toes as we get older, we should sing keys, phone, and purse, phone, and purse. And indeed, we sometimes have to come up with strategies for that benign forgetfulness. But when it's more constant, it might be something else. So softening to the reality of dementia would be the first stage of the Baal Shem Tov's prescription for us. Next slide. The next stage is what he calls Havdalah. Havdalah means making a distinction, drawing a distinction, differentiating between this and that. It's a pretty good word for discernment, for, I would say, curiosity. We can ask the question in Havdalah, what is it like now that I'm in this place that I didn't necessarily put in my GPS to go to? What is it like? What do I sense? What do I see? What do I feel? What's available to me? I think about this like being in a dark place and allowing your eyes to adjust to the dark. And when you do that, what looks at first like undifferentiated blackness suddenly becomes more variegated and subtle And you might see that there are shadows, and there is deeper darkness and less deep darkness. And you might notice that there's a spark here or a spark there. The Baal Shem Tov talked about this as sparks of light that might be encased by shards. But when we look more carefully, we might be able to peek at them and see them, those sparks of light that are hidden in husks. So what we might ask as we're being curious about this territory is, next slide, not just what's broken, but what's still whole. What's available? Where is connection? Where is pleasure? Where is meaning? Asking that question, what's still whole? Vis-a-vis ourselves, vis-a-vis someone else who has dementia, opens up the realization that, next slide, we are all beings made in the divine image. In the book of Genesis, in the creation narrative, when God says, let us make human beings in our image, it wasn't as long as they have high cognitive ability. I would like to suggest that we carry souls. We are a part of the divine. We have the divine within us as long as we are living and breathing. So being curious, looking around, noticing the light and the darkness creates a more subtle and rich experience of the wilderness that we might find ourselves in with dementia. Next slide, please. And the third and final stage of the Baal Shem Tov's approach that I'm suggesting we use here in terms of preparing for dementia is hamtaka, which means sweetening. And perhaps I'd suggest transformation. If we yield, if we become more open and curious about our experience, we might just find that we can be transformed in some way. It has been my experience that many unexpected things can happen when a person has dementia. When I worked in the nursing home, where I was a chaplain for 12 years, there was a very luminous woman who was an immigrant from Eastern Europe who did not speak in words, but she sang. And she had a particular savant capacity. Whatever genre of music you started a melody in, she would join in. It could be show tunes, it could be standards, it could be Yiddish songs, and somehow she would sing la 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 and be right in the music, on beat, in tune. And it was quite delightful and fun to be with her. So much so that when young people would come for various and sundry intergenerational programs to the nursing home where I worked, she was a favorite of theirs. And they would ask specifically, can I sit with, and they called her the La La Lady. So this woman was intriguing. And one day I happened to see some members of her family visiting with her. And I said to them, she's such a delight. You must really enjoy her. And I will never forget what her daughter said. She turned to me and looked at me with quite a serious face. She said, we do enjoy her, particularly because she wasn't always like this. She was very difficult. And now we just get to enjoy her. That is a hamtaka, a sweetening that could not have been anticipated. I'll share one more before we move on. When my father of blessed memory went to a nursing home, he had dementia, diabetes, and heart disease. And he went there because he fractured a hip. I had this prayer. I didn't understand it exactly, but my prayer was, let something happen to his soul. And that was my prayer, although I didn't know what it meant exactly, because my father was not an easy person. He had not had an easy life, and he wasn't easy. And I just prayed, let something happen to his soul. Now, if you had asked me before he went to the nursing home, what will he be like? I had lots of different models of what people could be like with dementia at a nursing home, and I would have been absolutely sure he'd be that guy in the corner giving the staff hell, complaining about everything, yelling, screaming, being resistant, being abusive. And that is not what happened. What happened was whatever hard shell my father had in his ego personality, it burned off. And what was there was just love and gratitude. And he was so content and so affectionate with his carers and with his family, and so appreciative. It wasn't like I knew that was what was underneath, but it was an opportunity to experience dimensions of his being for him and for those of us around him that was never possible earlier in his life. So not that transformations always happen, and not that they always happen in that direction. Everybody knows stories of people who transform in ways that are less positive, but we don't know what's possible. There's a lot of mystery, and if we can soften to the experience of dementia, it could be that there will be joy, connection, transformation that we wouldn't have known would be possible. Let's turn to the next slide, please. I want to invite you to practice being with the unwelcome, to use this concept of the Baal Shem Tov to practice with, not with dementia, but with something right here, right now, to see if we can work on softening, discerning, and sweetening whenever we encounter unwelcome experiences or realities, because they happen all the time. Traffic, lines, impatient others, waiting. So right now, I want to invite you for a few minutes to enter this practice. Sit yourself as comfortably as you can before your phone or your computer or your pad. Maybe see if you can have your feet on the ground. Breathe naturally. Take a moment to just allow your body to relax as much as possible. Take some time now to reflect on one realm of your life. Could be intimate relationships, family, partner, dear friends. Could be work. Could be physical health, or perhaps your religious and spiritual life. I want to invite you to ask yourself, is there something I'm avoiding acknowledging or I'm resisting in this realm of intimate relationships or work or my physical body or my religious or spiritual life? What is it that I'm avoiding acknowledging or I'm resisting? And if you become aware of something that you're avoiding or resisting, notice the resistance. Gently. Notice, what does it feel like in your body? Is there an image or a metaphor that describes it? Allow the resistance to talk to you. What would be the worst thing that might happen if you face the truth? What would be the best thing that might happen if you face the truth? Can you soften just a bit to this reality that you're avoiding or resisting? See if there's a hope you have about this reality. Maybe you would like to express your hope as a prayer. Something like this. Source of life, who's sustained me, who's sustained life, help me to face this reality I've been avoiding. Give me strength and courage. Guide me on this path whose direction I cannot yet see. Open me to the reality before me. Help me to be whole. This practice is a mini example of what I am suggesting we play with and experiment with in developing our muscle of being with reality, of greeting reality with curiosity and discernment and being open to sweetening. I want to pause now because perhaps there are questions among the participants. So, Gail, do you want people to chat and put their questions on chat, and then you can read?
Yeah, that's the easiest way to do it, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you have a question, we probably won't get to all of them, or I don't know, but please feel free to write it on a chat or comment.
Great stuff. Here's one. What's the relationship between dementia and enlightenment? Can we have both?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I think it's a mystery. I can't answer the question definitively, but what I can say is I'm very intrigued with the fact that many traditions view as ideal being able to be in the present moment. And that is what people with dementia do. They are in the present moment. So I don't know. Maybe.
Here's a question from Marianne. I find myself very afraid when I visit my aunt who has dementia. How can I learn to transcend this fear?
I think with a lot of gentleness. In my family, we always talk about this children's book where the wise older person says to the kid, courage is not about not being afraid. Courage is about going forward when you're afraid. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being afraid. It's just about not being paralyzed by it and being very gentle with ourselves. And as the wonderful meditation teacher Sylvia Borstein says, we can talk to ourselves with love and with gentleness. Sylvia would say, sweetheart, you're afraid. Can you take a deep breath? Maybe take another one. And just acknowledging and being really compassionate, I think, will help.
John asks, have you ever seen people really prepared for this? My mom was great at taking her loss of memory lightly from 89 to 92. It never was too bad, though.
I have seen people who are graceful, who are easeful. And that's really my desire, is can we experience dementia with more ease? Can those who are around us experience more ease? The people who are in the habit of resisting hard reality or denying hard reality, I think are going to have a hard time when this one hits as well.
Okay. Barbara asks, is change possible for people with dementia?
I think it is, but I think it's a mystery. Like the stories that I told, we don't necessarily know. I've talked to many people who are caregivers, family caregivers, who talk about toxic things in the relationship sort of melting away. And that's not necessarily with the person with dementia engaging in a deliberate process of change, but it happens around them and between others and them. And I think there's tremendous possibility for change. I just don't know if it can always be volitional.
Let's see. Zoe says, dementia patients are often without filters, as you said. This can lead to an honesty that is breathtaking, like in The Emperor's New Clothes, and also lead to an openness to making art and music without self-consciousness. I like to see and be a part of it as a person who works with this population.
That's beautiful. I love that breathtaking honesty. It's so true. Like, many kind of layers of, quote, civility disappear and that you can just tell the truth. I think about sort of islands of lucidity that happen sometimes amidst dementia, and the capacity to experience delight and to see beauty. I had the opportunity last week to participate in a visit to a museum with a group called Arts Philly, ARTZ, which is a group that organizes experiences of the arts for people with dementia and their carers. And the curator of this museum was present for this discussion of a painting. And we were just invited, people with dementia, people not with dementia, to say what we saw. And what she said is that things have come up in the conversations with people with dementia that make her want to rewrite all of the little legends that are there, the explanatory material about paintings, because people with dementia have seen so much more in those works of art than the professional curators who wrote those things to start with. So yes, I think there is a capacity for freshness and vitality and creativity in the midst of dementia.
Yes. Let's see. Zoe has something here. Advance directives can be consoling to us. For example, if you write an advance directive saying, please no loud noises or music in my room near me, and then adds, Get your music playlist ready now and your requests for food and clothing, etc.
Exactly right. If we're not busy denying that it could ever happen to us, we can do those sorts of things. I found somewhere from Next Avenue this list of requests, If I Get Dementia by Rachel Wonderland. I'll just read you a couple. If I get dementia, I still want to enjoy the things I've always enjoyed. Help me find a way to exercise, read, and visit with friends. If I get dementia, don't talk about me as if I'm not in the room. If I get dementia, don't feel guilty if you cannot care for me 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not your fault and you've done your best. Find someone who can help you or choose a great new place for me to live. So that's just an example. And apropos advanced directives, there is, and this is new, a dementia advanced directive. And you just Google it, you will find it online, and it's free download. And it's something which is really, I think, valuable to think about specifically, what do I want? Should I have dementia?
Another question, if people with dementia have written their life story earlier, do they seem to recognize the life they are reading about?
That's a good question. You know, the way memory loss works is that the first thing that goes is, it's like last in, first out. The most recent memories, and the short-term memory is the thing that goes. Long-term memory tends to stay for a really long time, and it can be very meaningful to reconnect with it through artifacts or reminiscing with somebody who remembers, or through somebody who invites that. Or if you have had the blessing of writing it down, yes, that can be really meaningful. I just want to make a note, not picking on anybody, but somebody referred to people with dementia as dementia patients. I want to encourage us to use people first language and talk about people living with dementia, because a person is so much more than simply somebody who's taken care of. And that's part of curiosity and getting away from the kind of two-dimensional view. We probably have time for one more.
Okay. Here's a request for clarification too, might help everybody. I found the question of being with the unwelcome very thought-provoking. The questions were excellent. Although I was not able to record all of them, can you review?
Sure. So what is it that you are avoiding acknowledging? Notice the resistance and what it feels like in your body. Is there an image to describe it? Let the resistance talk to you. What would be the worst thing that would happen if you faced the truth? What would be the best? And then what hope do you have about this reality? And you could express it possibly in the form of a prayer. Okay, next slide, please, Al. I just want to hold up a vision of the possibility of what might be there if we open to dementia. And this comes from Nader Shabahangi, who is one of the founders of the Zen dementia care organization in the Bay Area. And he has a book called Deeper into the Soul. And he says, for those who can truly lay aside their aversion or discomfort and learn to accept what is, the gifts of the soul await: equanimity, intimacy with the dream world and its magical ways, slowing down to the speed of soul essence. And he talks about dementia as forgetfulness. So next slide, please. I want to offer as a closing this prayer, which is an interpretation of a part of Psalm 92. May we grow fruitful as we age, ripe and abundant and sage. Keep our hearts open to all we face, present to goodness, even a trace. Renew us let our spirits soar. Sustain us, our rock for more. Next slide, please. I would be most happy to correspond if you want to write to me at this email address or check out the website. You can find some resources that you might find of interest. And I think it's absolutely amazing that Saging International offers these wonderful opportunities for us to learn together. I want to thank Al and Gail and also Jerome, who I think had to leave. But maybe he's still there. It's really my honor to be with all of you. Thank you and many blessings.